William stepped out of the truck in front of the Grand Plaza Hotel, hat on his head, and a leather suitcase in his hand. He wore a plaid shirt, blue jeans, and simple work boots. The staff didn't even stir. At the front desk, the manager, Michael, looked him up and down with disdain. "Our rooms are far too expensive for your type," he said with arrogance. Then came the cruel challenge. "If you can pay for the worst room, I'll give you the suite." The humiliation was public and brutal. What Michael didn't know was that he had just challenged the wrong man, because in a few minutes, the whole truth about who that simple man really was would make the entire hotel tremble. The contrast was stark. While other guests descended from Mercedes, BMWs, and Audis, wearing Italian suits and carrying designer luggage, William walked with an old leather suitcase in his hands and a peaceful smile on his face. His steps were firm, confident, belonging to a man who knew exactly his place in the world. At the reception, the atmosphere breathed opulence. Behind the mahogany counter, 3 uniformed receptionists were assisting guests with professional smiles. But as William approached, something in the air shifted. The youngest receptionist, Sarah, exchanged a discreet look with her colleague. An embarrassed smile replaced her usual welcoming expression. The second employee, a blonde young man about 25 years old, pretended to be busy with important papers. That's when Michael, the hotel manager, emerged from his office. Michael was 42, his gelled hair slicked back, wearing an impeccable gray suit and an arrogance that jumped out. He had worked in luxury hotels for 15 years and prided himself on knowing how to identify who belonged in that environment and who did not. His eyes scanned William from head to toe, like a scanner calculating value and provenance. "Good afternoon," William said, politely removing his hat. "I'd like a room for 3 nights." Michael's smile didn't reach his eyes. It was a smile William knew well. He had seen it in banks, expensive stores, and fine dining restaurants. The smile of someone who had already judged and condemned. "Of course, sir." "Do you have a reservation?" Michael paused deliberately. "No, I came straight from the country. I thought I could get a room today." Other guests began to pay attention. An elegant lady murmured something to her husband. A businessman in a navy suit stopped looking at his phone. The reception area, previously bustling with normal activities, now focused its attention on that improbable encounter. Michael consulted the computer with theatrically slow movements. His fingers typed without haste, as if each key were a hammer, building a wall of humiliation. "Our rooms are a bit specific," he said, emphasizing the word with disdain. "We only have suites available. They cost $800 a night." The amount was pronounced like a final sentence. Michael expected to see William back away, stuttering apologies, perhaps claiming he had confused the hotels. Some other staff members discreetly approached, curious to see how that embarrassing situation would resolve itself. William merely nodded, as if the price was perfectly reasonable. "That's fine. You can book it for 3 nights." The bewilderment on Michael's face lasted only a second, quickly replaced by an even more cynical smile. He leaned slightly over the counter, assuming a territorial posture that clearly marked who was in charge. "You understand we need guarantees, right? Credit card, proof of income." His voice got louder, ensuring others would hear. "Our guests are usually people of a certain standard." The phrase cut the air like a razor. Some conversations completely stopped. The embarrassing silence spread like ripples in a pond. It was then that Michael, sensing he had an audience, decided to go further. "You know what, my friend?" Michael smiled with a studied cruelty, savoring every word. "If you can pay for the worst room, I'll give you the suite." The impact was immediate. The lady with the expensive handbag covered her mouth, shocked by the rudeness. 2 businessmen exchanged uncomfortable glances. A young couple near the elevator stopped to observe the public humiliation. Even the employees seemed embarrassed by their boss's attitude, but none dared to intervene. Michael had crossed a dangerous line, turning silent prejudice into explicit humiliation. He expected nervous laughter, perhaps some discreet applause from the other guests. Instead, he found expressions of disapproval and a heavy atmosphere of embarrassment. William did not lose his composure. His eyes, which had seen much in life, met Michael's with a calmness that seemed to irritate him even more. There was no anger in that look, just a deep tranquility of a man who knew exactly his own worth. "What is the price of the worst room?" he asked simply, his voice firm and without any trace of humiliation. Michael chuckled, a nasty sound that echoed through the reception. 250, he answered, certain that he was ending that embarrassing charade once and for all. What Michael didn't know was that he was about to star in the biggest humiliation of his career. What he didn't imagine was that the man in front of him possessed more money than many of the guests of the Standard he so fawned over. What Michael couldn't foresee was that this mocking bet would become the most expensive mistake of his professional life. William put his hand in the back pocket of his jeans, a simple gesture that would make the entire Grand Plaza Hotel tremble in the next few minutes. Just as sometimes arrives dressed very simply, Michael felt he was at the height of his power. There he was, manager of one of the most prestigious hotels in the capital, putting an intruder in his proper place before an audience of distinguished guests. This was exactly what he had been hired for, to maintain the establishment standard. $250, he repeated, savoring every syllable. Cash, of course. Our hotel doesn't do installments. The word installments was pronounced with such disdain that it seemed to dirty the refined air of the environment. Some guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A blonde executive waiting on the sofa exchanged a meaningful look with her colleague, as if to say, "What an embarrassing situation." William remained motionless, hat in hand, looking directly into Michael's eyes. There was no challenge in that look, nor submission, only a deep tranquility that began to irritate the manager. "All right," William said simply. "I accept the bet." Michael blinked twice, as if he hadn't heard correctly. He expected pleas, excuses, perhaps an embarrassed withdrawal. Anything but this disconcerting calm. "You accept?" Michael's voice went up half a tone, revealing the first crack in his confidence. "I accept. If I can pay the $250 in cash, you give me the suite for free." "That's what you said, isn't it?" The reception was now in complete silence. Even the employees had stopped what they were doing to pay attention to the conversation. The situation had slipped out of Michael's control, but he could no longer back down in front of all those people. "Perfect," he said, forcing a confident smile. "But when you can't pay, you'll have to leave immediately. And please use the back exit. We don't want any more embarrassment." The unnecessary cruelty of the last sentence made some guests exchange disapproving glances. A man about 60 years old, clearly bothered, murmured to his wife, "How rude." But Michael was blind with his own arrogance, unable to perceive that he was losing the sympathy even of his own clients. William calmly nodded and started walking toward the nearest sofa where he placed his leather suitcase. The movement caused a small stir in the reception. All eyes followed the farmer's every step, as if they were watching a Wild West duel. "What are you doing?" Michael asked, his voice high-pitched, betraying nervousness. "I'm going to sit down for a bit," William answered, settling on the sofa with the naturalness of someone in his own home. "I need to organize the documents." The idea that this simple man could actually have $250 to pay in cash began to sow a small seed of doubt in Michael's mind, but he quickly dismissed the thought. Impossible. No one arriving by Uber dressed like that would have that much cash on hand. Meanwhile, William calmly opened his suitcase. The sound of the zipper echoed in the silent environment, like a drum announcing the start of a battle. Inside the suitcase, organized with military care, were documents, a few changes of simple clothes, an old leather case, and a brown envelope. Michael watched, trying to maintain a confident expression, but his eyes betrayed a pang of curiosity mixed with apprehension. What the hell was in that envelope? William took out the envelope with the same usual calm and began to count something inside it. His hands worked with precision, organizing whatever they were into small piles on the coffee table. "My God," whispered a lady close to her husband. "He's counting money." The information spread through the reception like fire in dry grass. Heads turned, conversations stopped, smartphones were discreetly pointed toward the sofa where William was methodically working. Michael felt the first tightness in his chest. His hands began to sweat inside the invisible gloves of anxiety. He still maintained his haughty demeanor. "Just money is not enough," he shouted across the reception, trying to regain control of the situation. "You need documents too. ID, social security number, proof of income." William looked up from the envelope and smiled for the first time since he had arrived. It was a gentle, almost paternal smile that made Michael feel inexplicably small. How could this man maintain so much dignity in the face of such humiliation? Why wasn't he embarrassed, nervous, defeated? It was then that William stood up and walked back to the counter. In his hands, a neatly folded wad of bills and a worn leather wallet. His steps sounded like church bells, announcing something monumental. $250, he said, placing the money on the counter with the same naturalness as ordering a coffee. Counted out, the atmosphere erupted in murmurs. Michael stared at the money as if it were a venomous snake about to strike him. His plans for public humiliation had just collapsed like a house of cards, but the worst was yet to come. The silence was deafening. Michael stared fixedly at the $20 and $50 bills neatly arranged on the counter, as if they were evidence of a crime he couldn't comprehend. His hands trembled slightly as he leaned in to examine the money more closely. This is $250? He asked, his voice coming out higher than he intended. Exactly, William replied, taking his documents from the leather wallet. Driver's license, social security card, and here's my bank debit card too, in case you need it. Michael took the documents with fingers that were now visibly sweating. William Carter, 54 years old, native of Austin, Texas. Everything seemed normal, common, exactly what he expected from a country bumpkin. But the money right there in front of him told a different story. The receptionist, Sarah, approached discreetly, curious to see the documents. Other employees also strategically positioned themselves to observe the unfolding situation. What had begun as a routine humiliation was turning into something completely unexpected. Where did this money come from? Michael asked, trying to regain some control over the situation. The question cut the air like a gunshot. Several guests completely turned to the scene, abandoning any pretense of discretion. An executive stopped reading emails on her phone. A couple of businessmen left their conversation mid-sentence. Even the cleaning staff stopped their activities to watch. William smiled again, that same paternal smile that completely disarmed Michael. It's honest money, young man. Earned with the sweat of my labor. What kind of labor? Michael insisted, now clearly looking for some irregularity. Some way to disqualify the payment and save face in front of the clients. I'm a rancher, William replied simply. The answer caused stifled giggles among some guests. Michael felt a wave of relief. A rancher, of course. Probably some small-time cattle producer who had sold a few heads of cattle and now felt entitled to frequent luxury hotels. A rancher, Michael repeated, regaining some of his arrogance. And what is a rancher doing in a hotel like this? The question was asked with such disdain that some people in the reception shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A man in a navy suit murmured something to his wife about poor manners, but Michael was determined to recover control of the situation. I came for the auction, William answered calmly. What auction? The Elite Sire auction happens tomorrow at the convention center. Michael frowned. He didn't know details about cattle auctions, but he imagined they were small rural events, attended by simple people like the man in front of him. And how much do you plan to spend at this auction? He asked, loading the word with irony. It depends on the animals available, William replied. But I brought enough for a few good breeding bulls. And how much does one of those breeding bulls cost? William paused as if calculating mentally. It varies a lot, from hundreds of thousands up to values in the millions, depending on the lineage. The information dropped like a small bomb in the reception. Some conversations lowered their tone. Cell phones were put down. All attention turned to William with a renewed intensity. Michael laughed loudly, a forced, uncomfortable sound. Excuse me, but are you saying that a bull costs millions of dollars? Elite sires. Yes, the best ones can reach impressive values. And you intend to buy several if the prices are good? Yes. Michael shook his head as if dealing with a mentally ill person. My friend, you arrived here by Uber dressed like this. He made a derogatory gesture toward William's clothes. And you want me to believe you're going to spend a fortune on cattle. The reception was now in total suspense. It was like watching a car accident in slow motion. Everyone knew something terrible was about to happen, but no one could look away. I'm not asking you to believe anything, William replied, his voice still calm, but with a new firmness. I just want the room you promised. Michael leaned over the counter, assuming an intimidating posture. Listen here, you rancher. I don't know what kind of fantasy this is, but this is a serious hotel. We serve serious people with serious money, not people who come here telling stories about millionaire bulls. Some guests began to shift uncomfortably. The situation was clearly getting out of hand. An elderly lady whispered to her husband, "This manager is being very rude." But Michael was lost in his own arrogance, unable to perceive that he was digging a deeper and deeper hole. "The money is right there on the counter," William said, pointing to the bills. "You made a bet. A man of his word keeps his bets." Man of his word? Michael laughed cruelly. A man of his word doesn't invent stories about millionaire bulls to make himself look important. It was then that William did something no one expected. He walked back to his suitcase, searched for a few seconds, and returned with a simple, worn smartphone. "May I make a call?" he asked politely. "A call to whom?" Michael counted suspiciously. "To my accountant. He can clarify a few things." Michael hesitated. The situation was completely escaping his control, but he had exposed himself so much that he couldn't back down now. The entire hotel reception was watching. Retreating now would be admitting he had made a terrible mistake. "You can call," he said, trying to sound confident. "But when this little story isn't confirmed, you leave here immediately." William nodded and dialed a number. The call rang on speakerphone, and a man's voice answered from the other side. "Good afternoon, William. How's the event there in the city?" "Good afternoon, Mr. Johnson. I'm fine, thank you. May I ask a question about our preparations for tomorrow?" The conversation that followed would forever change the lives of everyone present in that reception. "Mr. Johnson," William continued, keeping the phone on speakerphone so everyone could hear. "Can you remind me of the budget we set aside for tomorrow's auction?" The accountant's voice clearly echoed through the silent room. "Of course, William. We have a considerable reserve prepared for the bids. You said you wanted to have a comfortable margin for the important acquisitions." A growing silence took over the room. Michael felt as if the floor had begun to shake beneath his feet. The accountant's professional and respectful tone was undeniable. "Perfect," William said calmly. "And payments work as usual?" "Bank transfer or wire as usual. You also have the corporate card for any smaller needs." "Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Talk to you later." William hung up the phone and put it back in his pocket. The reception remained in deadly silence. Everyone present was looking at him as if they were seeing something extraordinary materialize before their eyes. Michael was pale. His hands visibly trembled as he tried to process what he had just heard. A considerable reserve, corporate card? Reality began to pound in his mind like hammer blows. That proves nothing, Michael stammered, desperate to maintain some control over the situation. Anyone can ask someone to pretend to be an accountant. The accusation was so desperate and pathetic that it caused murmurs of disapproval among the guests. An executive shook her head in clear disapproval. A businessman whispered to his wife, "Embarrassing." William smiled again, but this time there was something different in his look. A hint of amusement, as if he was finally allowing himself to enjoy the situation. "You're right," he said. "Words are just words. How about something more concrete?" William walked back to his suitcase and took out a black leather folder. From it, he pulled out a few carefully folded papers, returned to the counter, and handed the documents to Michael. "Last week's bank statement," he said simply. Michael took the papers with trembling hands. His eyes scanned the numbers once, twice, 3 times. The balance in the checking account made his eyes sting. A 7-figure amount that started with a 3, but that wasn't all. The transaction history showed movements that made Michael gulp. Transfers of hundreds of thousands of dollars, payments to suppliers, purchases of farming equipment that cost more than luxury cars. This must be fake, Michael mumbled, but his voice no longer held any conviction. He knew he was clinging to increasingly fragile arguments. "You're welcome to call the bank and confirm," William offered. "I have my manager's card right here." The offer was made with such naturalness that Michael felt his legs wobble. He looked around the reception and realized he had become the center of an embarrassing scene. All the guests were watching him with a mixture of discomfort and disapproval. It was then that an elegant couple arrived at the hotel. The man in an impeccable Italian suit, the woman in a dress that had clearly cost a fortune. The man headed directly to the counter but stopped abruptly when he noticed the tension in the atmosphere. "What's going on here?" the man asked, looking alternately at Michael and William. Michael saw an opportunity to recover some prestige. "Just a small misunderstanding, Mr. Harrison," he said, forcing a professional smile. "Nothing that compromises our service." Mr. Harrison looked at William, and his eyes lit up with recognition. "William! William Carter!" William turned around, surprised, and a genuine smile lit up his face. "Mr. Harrison, what a surprise to find you here." The two men greeted each other warmly, with hugs and back pats, typical of old acquaintances. Michael watched the scene with growing horror. "How's business?" Mr. Harrison asked. "I heard you made some significant acquisitions at the last Dallas auction." "I secured a few interesting sires," William confirmed modestly. "The genetics of those animals will make a difference in the herd." Michael felt the world collapsing over his head. There was one of the hotel's most important guests, clearly knowing and respecting the man he had spent the last 20 minutes publicly humiliating. "And?" William asked. "Still raising those Arabian horses?" "Always," Mr. Harrison replied. "I even have a foal that might interest you, son of one of my best studs." "Which lineage? Al-Rashid?" "You remember him." The conversation continued naturally, but every word was like a dagger in Michael's pride. The names, the implied values, the mutual respect, everything indicated that he had completely misjudged the situation. Mr. Harrison finally turned to Michael, and his expression completely changed when he noticed the obvious embarrassment on the manager's face. "Michael, I hope you're treating my friend with the respect he deserves," he said, his voice loaded with an authority that made the manager swallow hard. Of course," Michael stammered. "We were just resolving a few details of the stay." "What details?" Mr. Harrison asked, clearly suspicious. William intervened with his characteristic calmness. "The young man here made a bet with me," he explained. "If I could pay $250 cash for the simplest room, he'd give me the suite for free." Mr. Harrison looked at Michael with an expression that mixed incredulity and disapproval. "You made a bet with William Carter?" The way he pronounced the name, with respect, almost reverence, made Michael realize he had made a mistake far greater than he imagined. I didn't know." "Didn't know what?" Mr. Harrison was visibly irritated now. "Didn't know you were dealing with one of the most respected ranchers in the country?" Every word from Mr. Harrison was like a hammer, demolishing the last vestiges of Michael's professional dignity. The entire reception watched his public destruction with a mixture of fascination and horror. William placed a hand on Mr. Harrison's shoulder. "Calm down, friend. The boy was just doing his job." But Mr. Harrison was not willing to let it go. "Doing his job, humiliating guests based on appearance? Michael, do you know who this man is?" Michael shook his head, defeated. "Then let me introduce you," Mr. Harrison said, his voice loaded with a solemnity that made the entire reception pay attention. "This is William Carter, owner of the Gold Valley Ranch, one of the most respected livestock operations in the country." The revelation fell on Michael like an avalanche. "Gold Valley Ranch," murmured a lady on a nearby sofa. "Isn't that the ranch that always appears in agribusiness reports?" "Exactly," Mr. Harrison confirmed, clearly pleased to see the recognition growing on the faces of those present. "William is a reference in bovine genetic improvement. His animals are exported to several countries." Michael was white as a sheet. His legs trembled, and he had to lean on the counter to keep from falling. Reality was crashing down on him like a building being demolished. Every word from Mr. Harrison was a hammer blow to the last vestiges of his arrogance. "Have you heard about the program he developed?" Mr. Harrison continued, now addressing the entire room. "It revolutionized bovine genetics in the United States." Some guests began to whisper among themselves. An executive quickly checked her cell phone, likely searching for information. A businessman murmured to his wife, "Gold Valley. That name sounds familiar." "Ah, let it go, Harrison," William said, making a discreet gesture with his hand, as if trying to avoid the subject. "I won't let it go," Mr. Harrison exclaimed. "William developed techniques that are studied in international universities." The impact was immediate. Several guests completely stopped their activities to pay attention to the conversation. The executive who was checking her phone exclaimed softly, "My God, it's true. It's right here in the search results." Michael felt like he was in a nightmare. International universities, revolutionary techniques. The man he had humiliated for the last 20 minutes was a global reference in his field. "Mr. Harrison?" "Please," William intervened, visibly embarrassed by the attention. "You don't need to," Mr. Harrison insisted, now clearly outraged by the treatment William had received. "This hotel needs to know who it's dealing with." Michael tried to regain some control of the situation. I didn't know. "If the gentleman had identified himself? Mr. Harrison interrupted him abruptly. "Should William have to identify himself to be treated with basic courtesy? What kind of establishment are you running here?" The question cut the air like a blade. Other guests began to stare at Michael with clear disapproval. An elderly lady shook her head in censure. The couple of businessmen exchanged meaningful glances, as if questioning the hotel's quality. It was then that the receptionist, Sarah, timidly approached Michael. "Mr. Michael," she whispered, "there's a gentleman here who says he urgently needs to speak with Mr. Carter." Michael turned and saw a man about 40 years old, in a dark suit, approaching quickly. He carried a leather briefcase and had the confident posture of someone used to handling big business. "Mr. Carter," the man addressed the rancher directly. "I'm Mark Oliver from Oliver & Associates Auctions. I need to speak with you about a few lots for tomorrow." William greeted the man warmly. "Mark, how are you? Any issues with the event?" "Not exactly an issue," Mark replied, opening his briefcase. "It's just that we've received some early offers for sires we know you're interested in. We want to give you preference before opening them up to other buyers." "Mr. Carter, what values are we talking about?" William frowned. "Well above market average," Mark continued. "Some lots have already received proposals in the millions." Michael had to sit down. His legs simply wouldn't support him anymore. Millions for animals William was interested in buying, and the man he had treated like a beggar was discussing these values as if they were perfectly normal. "I'll think about it," William said. "I need to evaluate the animals personally before making any decision." "Of course," Mark replied. "Are you staying right here? I can pick you up tomorrow morning, and we can go to the exhibition center together." "Actually," William looked at Michael with a gentle smile, "I'm still sorting out a few details of my lodging." Mark followed William's gaze and immediately noticed the tension in the room. "Any problem, Mr. Carter?" Mr. Harrison jumped in with the answer. The manager here made a bet with William. If he could pay $250 cash for the cheapest room, he'd get the suite for free. Mark looked at Michael with an expression of absolute disbelief. "A bet with William Carter?" He let out a disbelieving laugh. "You know he's one of our biggest clients, right?" The information hit Michael like a punch to the stomach. One of the biggest clients of the most important auction in the region. "In fact," Mark continued, "Mr. Carter usually makes significant investments at our events. At the last Dallas auction, his acquisitions totaled impressive amounts. The reception was now in complete silence. Even the cleaning staff had stopped to listen. The dimension of Michael's mistake was becoming clearer with every revelation. William, however, maintained his characteristic calmness. "Mark, Mr. Harrison." "Harrison, I appreciate the support, but let's resolve this peacefully," William said, turning back to Michael. The young man made a bet. "I paid the $250. Now he will keep his word." Michael looked at the money still spread on the counter. The $250 represented less than William probably spent on a single business meal. He had bet against a man who moved fortunes without batting an eye. "The suite," Michael mumbled, his voice almost inaudible. "Excuse me?" William asked politely. "The presidential suite," Michael repeated louder this time. It is at your disposal." But William was not yet finished, and the biggest revelation was still to come. William walked calmly to where he had left his suitcase and took out an old, but well-kept brown leather briefcase. The silence in the reception was absolute. Every movement of the rancher was observed with the intensity of someone watching the climax of a suspense film. Before accepting the suite, William said, returning to the counter, "I need to clarify one thing." Michael watched him with wide eyes, like a cornered animal that didn't know where the next blow would come from. His hands visibly trembled as he tried to maintain some composure in front of the guests and staff. "You were right about one thing," William continued, opening the briefcase. I really should have identified myself from the start. Mr. Harrison and Mark exchanged curious glances. What else was there to reveal? What could be more impressive than what had already been said? William removed an official document from the briefcase with seals and stamps that glistened under the lights. He extended the paper to Michael, who took it with trembling hands. You can read it out loud for everyone to hear, William suggested gently. Michael looked at the document, and his face paled even further, if that was even possible. His hands began to tremble so much that the paper fluttered like a leaf in the wind. I can't, he stammered. Mr. Harrison stepped forward and took the document from Michael's hands. Let me see this, he said, adjusting his glasses. His eyes scanned the document once, then again, and then widened in total surprise. My God, William, you never told me this. What is it? Mark asked, curious. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat and positioned himself so everyone could hear him clearly. Deed of ownership, he announced solemnly. Registered with the county recorder's office of the city. Owner, William Carter. The reception collectively leaned forward, like an audience waiting for the grand finale of a performance. Property, the Grand Plaza Hotel building and adjacent land, located at 2847 Commerce Street. The impact was like an explosion in the reception. Several people gasped in surprise. The executive dropped her cell phone. A businessman choked on the coffee he was drinking. Michael literally staggered backward, needing to lean on the wall to keep from falling. He's the owner of the hotel? An elderly lady exclaimed, her voice high with shock. Mark was jaw-dropped, alternating his gaze between the document and William. William, you bought the Grand Plaza when? 3 years ago, William answered calmly, as if talking about the weather. The previous group was having financial difficulties. It was an interesting investment. Michael felt like the world was spinning in reverse. For 20 minutes, he had humiliated, mocked, and disrespected the very owner of the hotel where he worked. The man who indirectly signed his paychecks. The man who could fire him with a simple nod. 3 years, Michael mumbled to himself. 3 years? Exactly, William confirmed. Since then, I've been following monthly reports on the hotel's operations, customer satisfaction, quality of service, team performance. Every word was a stab in Michael's heart. Monthly reports. The owner was monitoring everything, and he, Michael, had just starred in the worst customer service episode in the establishment's history. Mr. Harrison shook his head, still in disbelief. William, why did you never tell me you bought the Grand Plaza? I prefer to keep my urban investments separate from the ranch business, William explained. Besides, I like to evaluate how things work when no one knows who I am. It's the best way to see the true quality of the service. The sentence hit Michael like a lightning bolt. William had purposely tested the hotel, and Michael had failed the test spectacularly. Mark still looked at the document with fascination. How much did the acquisition cost, if you don't mind me asking? It was a considerable investment, William answered diplomatically. Considerable. To someone who talked about millions as if they were pennies. Considerable meant an astronomical fortune. Michael had to sit down in a nearby chair before his legs gave out completely. And the most interesting thing, William continued, putting the document back in the briefcase, is that every month I receive reports on the excellent quality of service provided by our general manager. Michael felt his blood run cold. The reports, he himself wrote those reports, filling them with praise for his own work, inventing stories about satisfied customers and exceptional services. Very creative reports, William added with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The entire reception now watched Michael as if he were a rare specimen in a zoo. The humiliation was complete, total, devastating. He had been caught not only mistreating a client, but mistreating his own boss while systematically lying about his professional performance. Mr. Carter, Michael murmured, his voice coming out as a desperate whisper. I didn't know. Please. William observed him for a long moment, his calm eyes studying the man who had tried to publicly humiliate him. The entire reception waited in tense silence for what would come next. Justice had arrived, and now it was time for the final judgment. The silence in the reception was deafening. Everyone present held their breath, waiting to see how William would handle the situation. Michael was visibly destroyed, his hands trembling as he awaited the verdict that would define his future. William walked slowly around the counter, his footsteps echoing on the marble like the ticking of a clock counting the final seconds of Michael's career. When he finally stopped in front of the manager, his eyes were calm, but they carried the weight of a decision already made. "Michael," William said, his voice soft but firm. "3 years ago, when I acquired this hotel, I had a vision. I wanted to create a place where all people were treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their appearance or background." Michael swallowed hard, unable to find words. "I hired you because I believed in your technical qualifications. But what I witnessed today goes against everything this establishment should represent." Mr. Harrison and Mark watched in respectful silence. The other guests had discreetly moved closer, forming a semicircle around the scene. Even the staff, receptionists, security guards, cleaning crew, had stopped their activities to witness this historic moment. "You didn't just disrespect me as a client," William continued. "You revealed a character that cannot represent the values of this hotel. How would you treat other guests who arrived in simple clothes? Hard-working families? Retired seniors who saved up for a special occasion?" Each question was like a blade, cutting away what remained of Michael's professional dignity. He tried to speak, but only unintelligible sounds came from his throat. "But what disappoints me the most," William's voice gained a firmness that made the entire reception pay even closer attention, "are the reports you were sending monthly, reports filled with false information about your own performance while you treated clients this way." Michael closed his eyes, knowing his career had come to an end. When he opened them again, he met William's serene gaze. "Please, Mr. Carter," he finally murmured, his voice broken. I have a family. I need this job." William nodded slowly. "I know you have a family, Michael, and that is exactly why I'm going to give you an opportunity." A murmur of surprise ran through the reception. Michael raised his eyes, a spark of hope glowing in his despair. "An opportunity," he repeated, barely believing what he was hearing. "You will be transferred," William announced calmly, "to our ranch in Austin. You will start as an administrative assistant with a salary adjusted to the new role. There, you will learn about humility, honest work, and how to treat all people with respect. If in 1 year you demonstrate that you have truly changed, we can discuss your return to the hotel industry, but in a position where you learn to serve, not to humiliate." Michael nodded vigorously, tears of relief and shame streaming down his face. "Yes, sir. Yes, I accept. Thank you for the second chance." William turned to the receptionist, Sarah, who had watched the entire scene with wide eyes. "Sarah, you will temporarily take over the management," he announced. "I observed how you managed to maintain courtesy even in an embarrassing situation. That shows character." Sarah was wide-eyed, barely able to believe the unexpected promotion. "I thank you, sir. I'll do my best." "I'm sure you will," William smiled. "And the first decision I want you to make is a clear policy. In this hotel, all guests will be treated with the same respect, regardless of their appearance." "Yes, sir. It will be a pleasure to implement that policy." Mr. Harrison approached, clearly impressed with how William had handled the situation. "William, you always surprise me. Many men in your position would simply fire the employee. Firing him would be the easy way out," William replied. "But it teaches nothing. Michael will learn hands-on that true success comes from character, not arrogance." Mark shook his head in admiration. "That's why you're so respected in business, William. You see beyond the obvious." William took his $250 back from the counter and offered them to Sarah. "Use this for a training session on exceptional service for the entire team. I want this episode to be the last of its kind." "It will be done, sir." Michael timidly approached. "Mr. Carter, when should I report to Austin?" "Monday," William replied. "My ranch foreman, Old Joe, will teach you what honest work means. He's 70 years old and has more wisdom than many executives I've met." Michael nodded, showing genuine humility for the first time. "Thank you for the second chance, sir. I promise you won't regret it." William placed a hand on the former manager's shoulder. "Michael, everyone deserves a chance at redemption. What you do with that chance is entirely up to you." Mr. Harrison smiled and addressed the observing guests. "Ladies and gentlemen, You have just witnessed how a true leader resolves conflict, with justice, but also with mercy. The reception erupted in spontaneous applause. Guests, employees, even people who had stopped on the sidewalk to watch the commotion through the glass doors, all clapped for that extraordinary display of wisdom and humanity. William put his hat back on his head and picked up his leather suitcase. "Well," he said to Mr. Harrison and Mark, "how about we go upstairs? We have an auction to plan tomorrow, and I still need to review some details of the lots." As the three headed toward the elevator, the entire reception still watched them with admiration. William had transformed what could have been a simple revenge into a life lesson for everyone present. True justice hadn't just been served, it had been delivered with wisdom, compassion, and the greatness of someone who understands that true power lies in lifting others up, not tearing them down. And so, the simple rancher from the country taught everyone that true wealth is measured not by the money in the bank, but by the size of the heart and the way we treat our fellow man. After all, character can't be bought with money. It's built with dignity. Real wealth is how you treat those who don't need to impress you. Have you ever been underestimated? Or have you judged someone by their cover? Tell us in the comments what you learned from this. If William's turnaround made you rethink your attitudes, leave a like now and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. See you in the next video.